is enjoyed by white citizens, and shall be the subject to like punishment, pains, penalties, and to none other, and any other law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom to the contrary notwithstanding. This is the part that when I reread this kind of shocked me. And stern warning to government officials. This is added by our father, Ted. Section 2, be it further enacted that any person who under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom shall subject or cause to be subjected any inhabitant of any state or territory to be deprivation of any right or secured or protected by this act, or to different punishment, pains, penalties on account of such person having at the time been held in a condition of slavery or involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime thereof the party shall have been duly convicted, or by any reason of his color or race, than is prescribed the punishment for white persons, shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor, and on conviction shall be punished by a fine not exceeding $1,000 or imprisonment not exceeding 1 year or both in the discretion of the court. 1866, the fine for not enforcing this was $1,000. I can't imagine what it would be today, but it would be a horrendous amount of money. This was a serious effort to put together an act that would protect the freed slaves.
Okay, all right. So far what you have heard have been official documents that have marked the progression of civil rights in America. These are not stories, they are not fairy tales. People actually put pen to paper and their hearts and their prayers into making this happen. Because America is just that kind of place. The only place on the face of the earth willing to go to war against itself in order to make things right before God, as well we still should be. The final piece, I Have a Dream, promissory note speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., delivered on the steps at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation. We need tissue up here. This momentous decree came as a great beacon, light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of captivity. But 100 years later, we must face the tragic fact that the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean, or on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. So we have come here today to dramatize an appalling condition. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we have come to cast this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. And now is the time to open the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. And now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. And it would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment and to underestimate the determination of the Negro. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to just blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. Keep in mind the foundations of our nation and why things are so shaken up now, because we have unfinished business. And that is why we are here today. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds.
We are so fortunate today to have somebody with us that's really an exciting person. And when first Ted told me that he had gotten in touch with her, I thought, oh, because she's with Black Lives Matter. And a lot of you know about Black Lives Matter aren't necessarily on the same cause that we are, because we believe that all lives matter. But once I started talking to this lady, she's an absolute, she's not only a doll, but she's a very principled gal. And come find out, she believes in the same things we believe. And so I really was excited. I got to meet her today. I got to speak with her several times on the phone, which was really pretty exciting. And she's also the chairwoman of the Black Women of Faith. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Catherine. She goes by Kat, but Catherine McKenny. Come on up.
I'm honored, and I have had the pleasure of meeting these men today, and I'm very honored to be here at this time, in such a time as this, where we really have to make sure that we're bringing clarity to some of the issues that are at hand for today, as far as our justice system. And I have had the pleasure to be involved with a few different campaigns. And my biggest heart concern is for our people. And this is why I have chosen to take on the banner of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, and of course we know that all lives matter, and that's, we agree, and I definitely agree with that. All life is precious. And what we're focusing on, though, is the injustices that blacks have experienced throughout the years, and feel that it is a time to remind people that our lives are just as important. And that's pretty much the gist of the Black Lives Matter movement. Not to isolate anyone, but to actually separate ourselves as a people who have endured chattel slavery, and to make sure that it's understood that there are separate issues, it's a good word, that are necessary for us to tackle. And we have to focus on the Black lives. And we find a great honor in doing that. I know that it's not always in the news as positive, but please know that our intentions are positive. And what we're trying to do is bring awareness to the fact that Black lives are important. Black lives matter in our system, in our country, in the justice system. Now, I worked with, I founded the organization Black Women of Faith. And Black Women of Faith takes on a very important, we're holding a very important mantle for our community, which is we are women who believe in God, and we do have faith in our system that our families' lives will be healed. And it started off as a volunteer organization, really just something to help women get involved in the community and in the matters that are going on. But we have turned into a major political advocacy group for women, Black women, their families, and their children, and their men. You know, that's one of our biggest mantles too, is trying to hold up our men. Now, with the 14th Amendment, because I know about it and I've read about it. I studied Black history at Langston University in Langston, Oklahoma. I'm from Los Angeles, very much urban, yes. West LA, Pico, and La Brea. I grew up there. So when I grew up, in California, you know, there's people from all over the world there, and I didn't look at people as either Black or white or Asian or Hispanic. Everybody was people, and because everybody was different, it didn't matter what you were. You know, that was never important. But then being thrust into Oklahoma, and growing, I was in the most Black part of Oklahoma, which is Langston University, or Langston, Oklahoma. It played a major part in my being about how Black people were treated, and I could not believe that it had been such a great or grand difference. I said, okay, I'm in California and I'm dealing with people that, and I have no racist eyes, so to go there and see this, it just startled me. My job as a human was to help those who were still enslaved mentally there. So I took what I learned from my urban experiences and begin to play it out in the southern atmosphere. And it's very powerful once you can open someone's eyes to the fact that, hey, you know what? You are a whole person. Nothing's wrong with you. You have a mind. My goal was always to teach that racism was something that was taught, okay? Because it's not something that you just wake up and become. So we had to go through a reteaching period, which is what we're doing now, as even with this 14th Amendment. And I have a lot to say about a lot of what's going on, but to keep this here in the political arena, the 14th Amendment and the knowledge of it is very important to our community. It's sacred, and we have to uphold it. Because there's still, we still have to get past the understanding of it. And so that we could continue to make strides in America. It should not be abused. And that's the problem that I have with the use of the common use of the 14th Amendment now. Because it was very sacred. It released millions of people. And we have to make sure that we keep that intact. You know, that the clear purpose is defined and not distorted. Because it's something that we cannot lose as a people. Because that's our inheritance. Okay. Now, I do, as a black woman of faith, one of our major concerns is the accountability of our leaders. We have people that we vote for, and we put them in positions, but like she was saying, they don't always, they feel as if they are the official and not the representative of the people. And they make decisions that we're not all standing behind. So I've been in contact, very much so, with Reginald Bolding, and he is an elected official, but I reminded him just the other day that he's a representative of his community. And when you make decisions, you should make sure to be more informed. This was something that I believe Reginald Bolding could have taken a lead on and made this, held up this mantle here as ground zero and used it to make a very sharp difference. Now, I work for a lot of these politicians, but I don't always agree with a lot of decisions. So one of the most important things, like I said, is making sure that we're holding them accountable. And that's going to be for any politician. They're not officials, they're representatives of the people. I work with, also with Reverend Jared Maupin, who was going to be here in attendance today. And I think he may still be coming. But I've been able to, or been blessed to just be able to be an advisor to him in regards to certain things. He makes a lot of decisions that people are not happy with, but we hold him accountable. That's what I feel my job to do is. I'm representing a lot of women in our community, a lot of families, and I want to make sure that our representation is heard. I do public relations, so we're always bum rushing press conferences or, whatever to try to make sure that our point is across. You know, it's always two sides to the story. So today, what you're doing, I think, is very necessary. It's very powerful. It's a much needed and overdue conversation. And like you said, it might hurt to open up these wounds and dig in, but they have to be cleaned out so it can heal properly. So yes. Oh, thank you. Yes. I'm honored to be here. You know, like I said, this is a conversation that we need to talk about. Yes. And with that being said, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm available for questions if you have any. I won't take up no more time. I'll let us get back to the program, but it's an awesome opportunity to be standing here listening to all this. I appreciate it. Keep going.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's so awesome that you came out today and probably thinking, oh yeah, it's airborne and you can catch it. So thank you again for coming. So without further ado, we need to introduce Ron. We've been talking about Ron, and he's talked a little bit, but he is a child of God, a citizen, an American patriot, director of the Conservative Business League, chairman of the Arizona Project, Republican State Committeeman, Arizona Eagle Forum president, and proud American. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be on the same stage with Russell Pierce and Ted Hayes. You have no idea. Russell has been a hero of mine for many, many years. And I have heard that story that he talks about Fort McHenry. And I've asked him, please don't say that again. And he looked at me and said, why? Because I cry every time you tell that story. And I don't know how anybody in this room can hear that story and how dedicated these people were to the cause that they believed in, that they would give up their lives for us. It's almost like Jesus Christ. He had no idea who we were, and yet these people were there to fight for us. At any rate, I'm so glad to be here. I have been told that I'm supposed to stand in one spot here, and I may not do that because that's not, just somewhere between the flags. So if those of you that are watching on the video see an empty stage, you'll at least be able to still hear my voice. Now, I wanted to start out with something that is kind of a unique story. You heard my bio, which was kind of long. I'm kind of embarrassed that I've done all those things and a lot more I didn't put on there. Didn't realize I did that many things. But one of the first things that I call myself is a child of God. That's kind of an unusual thing to say. A lot of people don't say that. And a lot of people don't know that. We are all children of God. And I want to ask you all, you don't have to answer, this is rhetorical. What are the two greatest things that we have been given? The two greatest gifts that we have been given on our turn on earth. It's life. And we know where that came from. That came from God. And the second one, and this is an important one, you can call it what you will. You can call it liberty. You can call it freedom. You can call it free agency. But it's the ability to choose what you want to do with your life. Now, why is that important when we talk about issues that are dealing with races? because those of us that were white had a lot of choices that we could make. But people that were black did not have a lot of choices they could make. My family came to America by choice. My brother Ted Hayes' family came here because he was bought and sold and put on the Atlantic slave trade ship and ended up in America. Ultimately, that may be a blessing. But I want to take you all on a little trip right now, because we study history and we really don't know history. Our history is one that we see the highlights of. We say, yeah, I'm proud to be an American. And I am. Am I proud of some of the things that happen in our background? Absolutely not. But you know what? Through the inspiration of God and the men that founded this country, they gave us an eraser. In the Constitution, they gave us an eraser. And we could make amendments to a document. As much as we love the Constitution, it was not a document when it was founded that I would have been proud of. The reason why is it allowed black people in America to not be citizens of this country. That's a shame. That's sad. But I want to take you on this little journey, okay? Come back with me. We're going to go back. Let's go to the 30s, the 40s. Back to the turn of the century, back to the Civil War. Oh no, it goes far, 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 far back from there. Let's go into the 1700s, okay? No, it goes back further than that. So forgive me for taking the liberty here of having some cheat sheets, because there's a lot I want to impart today. No, I'm not going to go through this for those of you that are getting hungry. I'm not going to go through all this. But I want to go back to a time, and a lot of things were different back then. And I've tried to point some of the things out. But we're going to go back in time to about the 1600s. That's an interesting time period. America had already been founded, at least. It wasn't a nation. And I want to look at things. I want you to take your glasses that are probably rose-colored, and I want you to view things not in terms of black and white, but in terms of right and wrong, which is the way we should all look at things every day in our lives. Not necessarily who the messenger is. Is it a correct message that we are receiving? And that is important. So as we go back in time, that's the key element. Not black, not a white issue. Is it right or is it wrong? And with that new dimension on what we're looking at, we're going to find some very interesting things. Oh, you probably heard the Civil War was fought over states' rights, correct? You probably all did. I'm not seeing a lot of yays. Maybe I'm just the only one that thinks that. But the slave trade, believe it or not, built the modern world. Not just America, but the modern world. It wasn't always a black issue, and it wasn't always a white issue. We know that slavery existed and that the slaves built the pyramids. A lot of you may not know that slavery actually built our buildings in Washington, D.C., our capital. There was a lot of slave labor used in that. A lot of people don't know that. But there's so much out there that we don't understand, and we're going to try and get through that. We're going to travel through time. It's right or it's wrong. And I'm going to express a few opinions that are mine. And I may preface that by saying, this is my opinion. And I do that because I've been told by attorneys, if you say that's my opinion, you can't be sued. So I don't want to be sued. So the first thing that we need to look at is slavery in America started about 1660. Okay, long, long, long before most of us believed that slavery started. Now, one of the important things here is that, and I don't want Americans to feel guilty, America did not invent slavery. That's the key element here. You know, when everybody thinks of slavery, they always talk about America. There were more slaves in what we consider Central and South America than there ever were in North America. And the original slaves, believe it or not, did not come here on slave ships. They came as indentured servants, and some of them actually came because of religious prejudices. So that's really important to know. It got into a racial thing in the, I say about 1665. And here's one of the things, and I know I'm not, once again, not trying to lay blame on anybody. It's just, is it right or is wrong? Is it true or is it not true? Slavery started in Africa when blacks captured other blacks and sold them. And it was white people, Muslims, believe it or not, British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and other countries actually purchased the black people and forced them onto slave ships, and goodness knows where they ended up. About 445,000 ended up in what we consider America now. At the time of the Civil War, there were about 4 million black slaves in America. And that was quite a number of years later, if I might add. I wanted to take this opportunity to say something that, quite frankly, I never thought of, and probably most of you didn't think of this either. Because I'm one of these guys, I grew up in a lily white community, and it's just, I knew about slavery, but I never thought of the details of slavery and what it meant to human beings. Humans that may not look like us, but they're every bit as much as I had indicated, a child of God. We're all children of God. He loves each of us. But here are things that slaves could not do. And you may want to, if anybody's really interested, if you've got a pencil and paper, you might want to write some of these things down. This was astounding, and I never thought of this. They could not own property. Why couldn't they own property? Because they were considered property. Chattel. You heard the word chattel? We've used it a couple times here today, and Ted will use it more. Chattel is property. They couldn't own property. They couldn't make much money if they made any at all. They could not go to school. Something as basic as that. They could not go to court. They could not change employers unless they were sold to somebody else. They couldn't move. We think about this. I don't know how many of you are native Arizonans. I know Senator Pierce is, but a lot of you folks came from somewhere else, and you probably didn't even think about it. You just packed up and moved. They never had that option. They could not protect their families. Slaves were not given guns for obvious reasons. They couldn't send money back to Africa, as we have a lot of illegals do, sending money back to the countries of their origins. And above all, they could not strike. If they didn't want to go to work because working conditions weren't good, guess what? They went anyway. They received the lash. And that's really an unfortunate thing. Many of you may not know there was a gentleman by the name of Crispus Attucks. Have anybody heard of him? Good. Crispus Attucks was a black slave in Boston. at the time of the American Revolution. For some reason or another, he was moved to participate in what we now call the Boston Massacre that happened just prior to the American Revolution. Crispus Attucks was amongst 5 people, I believe it 5, might be 6, that was shot and killed. A black slave believing in America was one of the first people killed in our revolution. Think about that. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this. There were 5,000 Negroes that fought in the American Revolution. And if you know history, we all know that only about 30% of the American people at the time of the American Revolution actually supported the American Revolution. And so these were heroes, but we don't hear much about it. Perhaps the black community hears a little more during Black History Month, but those of us that are white don't know much about that, and that's a shame. This is our history. I got so many notes here. We get to 1776. You all know what that was, July 4th. Do you all know the term moral imperative? A moral imperative is something that you believe deeply in. It is a moral issue that you put at the top of your bucket list. Okay. We had read the whole document here, but I want to just read this part because this is the one we all want to pay attention to. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and amongst those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't say we're all equal in any other way, not in stature, not in wealth, not in intellect, but we are all equal with those principles. And I use that word principles because America took the high road with that document. The important thing to know about that document is how and why it was written the way it was. It did not say all men are created equal except blacks. It did not say all men are created equal except whites. It did not say all men are created equal except for Asians. It was an absolute truth. All men are created equal. Now this is important as we get later, go on down here and we start talking about the Dred Scott decision. Okay? Once again, pencils and paper ready if you want to see anything about the writing of the Declaration of Independence. There is a remarkable video that you can get. It's a musical. It's called 1776, and I would encourage you all to get that video and look at it. It tells the political struggle that our founders had in Pennsylvania. Some of you have heard me say that in order for this country to be born, they had gotten together at the Continental Congress and they decided that the decisions had to be unanimous. That if any one of the 13 colonies said, I don't want to do this, we would not have been a country. Benjamin Franklin gave that famous statement of his when talking about the 13 colonies, that if we had 12, we wouldn't have been born. We would have been stillborn. But if many of you know what he had said. If we don't hang together, surely we'll hang separately. And he meant that. But as you go through this, you'll find that there was, as Abraham Lincoln said, a peculiar interest in the southern states in the slavery issue. And what they did, they kind of forced some of the language in the Declaration of Independence. Not so much what it did say, but what was taken out of the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to try to read this if I can here. This is what was taken out. This was Thomas Jefferson wrote this, himself a slave owner, I might add. Talking about the King of England. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights to life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death on their transportation hither. And he now is exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he had deprived them by murdering the people upon whom he also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. They wrote differently back then. What that says, guys, pretty much is slavery is bad. And you may find that interesting from a slaveholder. I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. Russell Pierce surely knows this because he's such a constitutionalist. But when the Constitution was written, we had the same scenario. We had states that did not like certain elements of the Constitution. And therefore, there was this one thing, and I was really upset over it, as most of you would be, and that's the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, of which black people were considered 3/5 of a person for the representation census, which means that the South, while people of color were not represented in the Congress because of the prejudices that they had down there, they were able to get more representation by having them 3/5 of a person, even though they could not vote. However, remember, we're back in time now. The way in which taxation of the various states came about was totally different than it is today. That 3/5 vote was not only for superior representation in the Congress, but it was also a method of taxing each state by the federal government. That's an interesting approach to this. It's probably never ever happened in this country before or since. And quite frankly, I think it's a little bit disgraceful. In 1871, there was a country that was owned by the French. It was a French colony, actually, called Haiti. I think it was called Santo Domingo or something like that. And the French had a lot of slaves down there. And the slave population actually revolted, and they killed all the white people on the island. It wasn't a pretty sight. But one of the things that did is put the fear of God into the southern part of our nation that believes so much in slavery. And as a matter of fact, a lot of those slaves actually did come to South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and there were some problems. I won't get into that. Ted and I have talked about this on numerous occasions.